This presentation today is an example of what I'm expecting for your media project in this class, your digital media project. Your final project will be to take a cooperative, approve it with me, and then walk through a number of things, as I'll talk about here in my presentation, things related to the lessons we've learned in class. So as we think about those today, I've sort of smoothed this out a little bit because I know this co-op very well, and I know the content, and I'll explain some things as I go through. You will be watching every one of your other students' presentations in class. So you want to make sure and take the time to do this, make it look interesting, because all of your peers in this class will be looking at your media presentation. Today I'm going to start with Humboldt Creamery. Humboldt and Del Norte counties are in the northwestern part of California. These dairies, it's a dairy cooperative, a creamery cooperative if you will, are located near the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Ocean sends breezes off the coast for 9 months a year, and the cows are grown on grass. It's a very small milk shed. It has less than 5% of California's total milk production, but is very, very isolated, as you can see here from the map. The products, prior to 2000, when the cooperative changed its strategy, the products were very simple. They tend to make milk powder or fluid milk, what we might think of as being simple products. And then over time, it moved to an organic ice cream strategy, which ultimately failed, and we'll look at the reasons why in this particular case study. What's the history of Humboldt Creamery? Like many cooperative creameries, it was established in the decade of the 1920s. We had a technology, you may have seen these in people's front lawns, but basically there were cream separators in every farm. These were hand cranked. The milk went through the separator. The cream was separated into perhaps butter or milk, and then the cooperative picked up this cream and so forth. In the early 1920s, it became common for the dairy farmers to take their milk to a creamery, to a building where all of this was done in a high-speed environment. For those days, high-speed environment. So in 1929, this cooperative formed 129 dairy producers in these two counties, and by 2009, they had 50 dairy farmers. As I mentioned, these are heavily pasture-based systems. In the middle of the 1990s, we saw a growing movement in organic production in the United States. This started with consumer demand for organic vegetables, and then later expanded to organic fruits, and then into other organic products. And so these dairy farmers thought, you know, we're already doing a lot of things that are related to organic production. Our cows eat grass for 9 months a year. And outside of this non-GMO thing at the time in 2000, the cows were meeting the criteria for these other things, but they weren't being certified organic. In the wintertime, when the grasses were not growing, they would feed these on protein sources which might have come from genetically modified feeds. And so the cooperative said, let's make all of our growers organic, and we'll take advantage of our isolated location and farming practices and move to an organic production system. So the strategic intent was to move to organic production in the early 2000s. 2001 and 2000, the board went through a strategic planning exercise. They worked with their lenders, some other stakeholders, and said, what's the future of this cooperative going to be? Will we be a survivor or not, relative to some other things going on in the United States? The board and management said, we really want to be a survivor, and we want to move into higher valued products, organic ice cream, and try to capture value added instead of just selling into 100% milk powder. The goal, therefore, was to move to 100% organic milk production from their farms, with a goal of being 60% organic by 2006 and 100% organic by 2010. Now, they were not producing, they had no processing plants to speak of. So in 2004, they bought 3 old facilities that made ice cream. A Dairy Gold facility, Arctic Ice Cream, and Vita Rich Ice Cream. Much of the transaction was financed with debt because the members didn't have the cash to pay for this, and they worked with Dairy Farmers of America, based in Kansas City, who provided equity capital to carry out this strategy. So that changed what their milk was. They were moving to organic ice cream with a little bit of fluid milk for local consumption, and a little bit of milk powder. But they were going to have to purchase cream for the ice cream because their cows were Holsteins and they weren't really producing the type of protein that they were going to need. And they went to Costco, the large retail grocer, and said, we would like to produce your organic ice cream, your premium ice cream. And Costco was in a big expansion mode at the same time. And so they said yes, but as you might think about this, building a brand becomes very, very expensive. Moving to organic production is not easy for dairy farmers. So think about this 3-year transition. To go to organic, there's a 3-year transition program. You have to show that you're making the progress and the cows are in fact being fed organic grass and so forth, but you're not getting a price yet for organic. The organic milk price is higher, but you're not getting that price on the output side. So the Humboldt board said, we're going to give our farmers a subsidy, a cash subsidy, because we can't pay them the higher organic milk price to offset the higher cost in the wintertime of the organic feed. So they said, for 3 years, we will pay a higher price to our members to offset the organic feed. And the other thing about this is this grass yields were not as high with the non-GMO, non-organic Roundup Ready type alfalfa. So this was very expensive because organic feed grains were not common in the early to mid-2000s. As we think about what was going on during this time period, so on the x-axis, I've got 2005, and I've taken prices through 2009. This blue line is the margin. This is the price of milk that the farmer gets from their cooperative minus their feed cost. This orange-red line is the price minus feed minus other costs, other variable costs. So it's expected these lines will be parallel with each other, which they are. There's a high correlation between the two lines because the only difference between these two costs is other variable cost. Look what, and at this line 0 here, the farmer is not getting a return to pay their fixed costs, like management, like facilities. And if the line is below 0, like this line, every pound of milk, every 100 pounds of milk or 100 weight produced by the cow is yielding negative profits. So this is not a good thing. So this is going on during the time period when the organic production, the farmers are converting to organic production. Meanwhile, what's going on with organic corn prices? So prior to 2007, the USDA Agricultural Marketing Service, or AMS, did not report organic corn prices, but they did starting in 2007. Look what's going on during this time period. Their feed costs are going up. Milk prices, as we'll see, are going down. Feed prices are going up. This figure looks at somewhat analogous to the demand side. In blue, we have the consumption of organic milk by consumers during this time period. And if you look at it, it starts to grow up a little bit and then it kind of flattens out. This red line is the ratio of total, this is organic milk, divided by total milk. So what's going on is organic consumption's going up, and then when the Great Recession hits, it flattens off. Meanwhile, the organic milk being produced by cows keeps going on. Every cow gives milk every day. So we have a trend going on here. Consumption begins to level off, and production does not level off. And then that's going to lead to high volatility in milk. So during this time period, we're getting larger dairy farms. So we're moving to dairy consumption. In California, a lot of California milk is exported in the form of milk powder. This is going to Asian countries. And we're seeing an increase in the herd side. Humboldt dairy farmers are not expanding production because the supply of grass is limited and they don't have much land to expand. So there's a number of things going on with Humboldt that makes them very difficult. The other thing that's going on is there's certain things of production. A little bit of excess milk causes the price elasticity of supply to become very volatile. So milk is very price elastic. A little more milk can really cause significant changes in price. We can't store this. That's one reason why we've got the milk marketing orders. Remember that graph I had several slides ago that showed the negative time period when producers were losing money? So, on average, we saw farmers losing $150,000, and they lost almost $10 billion of equity in the early parts of 2009. This was the worst 6 months in the dairy industry over the last 50 years. All of this is what we call a price squeeze. We don't often find price squeezes in economics, but what they are is your output price that you're getting is going down and your feed price is going up. Therefore, your margins become squeezed, or in the case of this particular time, negative for 4 months there. And that's what happened here. We saw the net margin becoming very, very red, negative for U.S. dairy farmers. Meanwhile, the Great Recession was going on. So President Obama took office in the spring of 2009. We saw the global economy slow down beginning in October 2008. It actually was going on a year earlier, but really we saw things in October 2008. And the global financial crisis called the Great Recession took hold. As per capita income went down as people were laid off, we had double-digit employment, people stopped paying for premium products like organic ice cream. So Humboldt Creamery farmers was in the process of getting a large number of their farmers organic, with the hopes of building more and more organic ice cream. Meanwhile, the organic ice cream market's going down, the consumption of organics has stabilized, the production of organic is going up by Humboldt farmers, and the board has been paying a subsidy to offset the higher organic corn prices. All of this was not good for California producers, and in particular in Humboldt Creameries. California recently went to a milk marketing order in 2008 or 2018. We're not going to discuss that in class here today, but basically dairy prices in California are very dependent upon exports of milk powder. And here are some examples of what those exports look like. This purple line is the exports. So during that part of the Great Recession, exports dropped way off, and this really affected U.S. dairy products prices. So what's going on in this case? Humboldt Creamery in February 2009. Keep in mind that the spring, that December 2008 through March or April 2009 time period is when margins above variable costs are going negative for dairy farmers all across the United States. So at the height of that time period, the CEO resigns. The board of directors told the CEO resigns, and they said, oh, by the way, there's going to be some inaccuracies in your financial statements. Be ready. 2 months later, in April 2009, the co-op was forced to file for bankruptcy. During that February 20 through April 20 time period, the cows kept producing milk, and the farmers kept delivering milk to the factory. The factory kept running, but these farmers were not being paid for their organic milk production. So they declared bankruptcy, and the assets were sold to Foster Farms in August then for $19 million at an auction. And we'll talk about what that meant from a financial standpoint. The CEO was found guilty of embezzlement, fraud, and sentenced to 30 months in prison. He was also fined. We had no money, so he wasn't able to pay that fine. What was going on? Think about the balance sheet of a firm. We have assets, liabilities, and equity. Inventory is an asset. The inventory in this case was carried on the books at a much higher price than it was actually worth. So think about that price squeeze. At the start of this time period, the price for organic milk and ice cream was up here. As people stopped buying organic ice cream, the price dropped. Therefore, the value of the inventory should have been dropped as well. But the cooperative did not reflect the drop in inventory. So the assets were overstated. The assets were higher than they should have been. It was driven by this inventory figure. Once the true value of inventory was known, and this was written down, it was impossible. You can't create more liabilities. You can't go borrow money to offset this drop in inventory. Equity had to be written down to balance the accounting identity. So an asset was written down to make the accounting identity hold. The only account that can be reconciled is equity. The equity was what held by the farmers, and that's why the equity in this case became negative. The other thing going on during this time period was the co-op knew that this equity was beginning to, that the inventory was overvalued, and they knew that the equity position wasn't what the book said it was. So they were trying to go out and issue preferred stock. Preferred stock might be thought of as a CD almost. You sell preferred stock, interest rate is paid on that. In the case of a CD, there's a time limit, maybe 6 months or a year or 5 years, when that can be bought back by the cooperative as an asset. In the case of preferred stock, it's only callable by the board of directors. So the financial statements were wrong, but they were selling equity based on the inaccurate financial statements. So as you might suspect, nothing good happens after the financial statements begin to be wrong. The members lost all their equity, again, because the inventory valuation was going down. The equity had to be rebalanced, and in fact, the equity was actually negative. And meanwhile, the farmers have been delivering milk throughout this whole time period, not being paid. All that went away too. The bankruptcy proceedings of sale resulted in many changes to the cooperative. The co-op had to sell some of their assets. First of all, it was no longer a cooperative because they were acquired by someone else. What the hell's going on here? Forget my language. I'm going to start all over again.
No, that's okay. I didn't see that. Did it just do it here?
Yeah. Once the cooperative assets were sold at an auction, the co-op disappeared. The plant and assets were still there, but they were no longer cooperative. The new owners sold some of the facilities to kind of balance the books. The farmers could still sell their milk to the new owners, but they had no control. There was no board of directors anymore, and they had no ownership because there was no equity. It was not a cooperative. What happened to those 50 or so producers that were left? They had to find a home for their milk. Some went to several other plants further away. Some stayed selling to the new owners of Humboldt Creamery. What about the board? The dairy farmers were close-knit, and this was an isolated community, as we saw earlier. There was not much director leadership training. It was very difficult for these farmers, because they were milking their cows, to go to outside education programs. The CEO had grown up locally. There was a high degree of trust between the board and management. It was a small community. But there were some signs that maybe this all was not on the up and up. One of them was the chief financial officer, or CFO, was not in the board meetings. Second of all, the local auditor, who had a small operation, was not equipped probably to handle an audit for a firm that bought 3 plants in 2004 and went through a big change in strategy. The board undertook this big change in strategy. At the same time, it was giving cash subsidies to help producers convert to organic production. There wasn't much capital left on the balance sheet in case something went wrong. Well, what can we learn? Number one, the co-op did not have enough equity in case the strategy went wrong. So think about this. Think about the property rights issues we've talked about and so forth. There was a horizon issue. We had some farmers who did not want to support this strategy, but the co-op made a big change in 2004. There was no free ridership issue, so that's not an issue. There really wasn't much influence costs, although maybe there were some large growers in the area that might have had some issues there. The big thing was the co-op just didn't have any flexibility in case something went wrong. The members approved a strategy which required additional investment. This was a high-risk strategy, but they didn't help support it. In fact, they needed a subsidy to make the strategy work. The high level of trust, there was an agency problem here. The trust in management was not justified, especially with the rapid growth. The board didn't fully understand what was going on after 2004. There are some parallels to other cooperatives such as Country Classic in Montana, which is now owned by Dairy Gold in Washington State. So the moral of the story is, yes, every farmer would like to be paid a price for their milk, for example, in this case, organic ice cream. That requires investment. That investment capital has to come from somewhere. And in this case, the members didn't provide that investment capital. It was provided by banks and the outside investor in Dairy Farmers of America. When something went wrong, as it did in this case, the members were forced to sell their cooperative.